All right. Good morning, everyone. Happy Thursday. Before we get into the training today, I wanted to just reiterate an announcement we made earlier in the week, and all of you should have gotten an email where we've stated that COCOA reviews have started. I've reminded everyone of this previously over the past couple of months, but now the audits have officially begun. So you should have seen that announcement, and make sure all of your documentation is in ACC so that ACC Headlight PDOT FALHub so that we can properly and accurately grade your projects. So I just wanted to make that announcement. Other than that, we will get into the training and best practice for today. So a couple of pages I wanted to highlight as we begin. First is obviously the wiki site, so where all of the resources are, and in particular today, it's currently under the headlight section, but there are applicable sections in the construction and also pre-construction parts of it. But for headlight, which is what most of what we will be talking about today, it is underneath the headlight section here. And the last time we did a training on specifically JC card submission and how it ties to ACC was back in 2023. So these trainings are back in 23. So we wanted to provide you all updated best practice for material documentation, as that is something that we're looking for in COCOA reviews. But also, as the software updates, ACC releases new features every 2 months, and we also customize workflows as we're working through a lot of these tasks. So we find better ways to do things. So since we haven't touched upon this topic since 23, thought it would be a good opportunity today to go over it. So in this headlight section, they talk about JC cards, but today is going to be a little bit more than JC cards. It's going to be JC cards, the workflow between intake of the contractor material submittal from ACC, and then also taking that, deciphering it, doing the initial review, and then moving it towards headlight. So obviously today we'll be talking about headlight form section, but also going to be mentioning the Highway L master material list. And this is obviously something that is published on the state website, and it is something that the lab goes by, but obviously this is just based off of standard specifications. So one thing I wanted to note here is that whilst we're looking through this guide here, we want to be sure that, you know, we're taking a look at the latest and the most updated spec section, right? So obviously that will be your project special provisions. So if your project special provisions overrides this, then obviously that is going to take into effect. So just wanted to be wary of that, albeit we will be using this today's example, but just wanted to make note of that as you go and review materials on your own projects. So with that, we will get started with ACC. So obviously things start from the submittal module, and with every submittal on your project, you know, you must be reviewing them, submitting them, reviewing them through Autodesk Construction Cloud. So for today's example, we're going to start off at a starting point where the contractor has already submitted their material documentation. And in this example, it's going to be mixed design. So we're going to go through a mixed design example, some best practices when taking it from the workflow of ACC to headlight back to ACC. Because ACC, obviously, and you've heard me say this a million times, ACC is obviously the platform that we communicate and correspond with the contractor, with the exception of progress payments and headlights, or sorry, progress payments and change orders, as that correspondence for the official documentation is obviously in headlight. But other than that, correspondence with the contractor officially documented is within Autodesk Construction Cloud. So that being said, we'll take an example of a submittal 255, where let's say that the contractor then submitted a mixed design. And as you can see, the attachment is here. And this is just an attachment, example attachment. It's of a spec section. But let's pretend that this is a mixed design. And the contractor submitted it. Obviously, in ACC, there are required fields where the contractor needs to input certain information. So obviously, one of the things that we're looking for here that we'll need in a JC card is the spec section. Also, it's important to have the sub-spec section as well, because in most cases, when we go and check the master material list, this is the spec section that we're referring to. So want to be sure that we have the overall spec section, but then also if the contractor is not submitting the sub-spec section, if applicable, need to make sure that they're doing that. And another thing that I look for when reviewing these things is, you know, in the specs, it says that they're required to submit a cover sheet. This kind of covers the cover sheet part of it, where we need spec section, sub-spec section, type of submittal, priority of the submittal, who submitted it. It all tracks it automatically in ACC. But a couple of things that we still need to look for that we need in JC cards, and this is probably something that you've heard over and over again, obviously, is pay items. Because when we're doing material certification in headlight at the end of the project, if we're not tying this example mix design to those applicable pay items in headlight, then it will not show up on your material certification document. And you need to make sure that any work that the contractor does with this mix needs to apply to those pay items that they are submitting acceptance for or submitting for approval. And those pay items are very, very, very important. And you guys probably already know that, but just wanted to reiterate that one of the most important things that if I don't see on a submittal, I submit back immediately, or I return back to them immediately, is what they're intending on using this mix design for. So the pay items is obviously something to look for. And without the pay items, then you as your project team needs to go in and look for what they could potentially use it on, but that's not the best way to go about it. The best way to go about it is to send it back to the contractor, because they're the ones who know what this material is going to be used for. And then that eliminates time for our project team to go through and look for something that the contractor needs to be submitting themselves. So that's required information that they need to submit. So if I don't see that on a submitter, then I'm sending it back to them and saying, what is this applying to? So that's one of the main things that I look for. Another thing, obviously, with all COCs and mixed designs, and I know Lab obviously is stickler for a right reason for making sure that all material certification documentation is certified within a year, right? So immediately, if I see something that's not within a year, I will also send that back and make sure. Because if we notice that something's not within a year, and let's say that we need to send something to the engineer of record before we send it to H.Lab, and let's say the engineer of record takes a week to review it, and then we send it to lab, and they take a week to get to it, which happens in most cases. Then 2 weeks go by, and then lab comes back and says, well, look, your material certification is out of within the date requirements. It's not within the date requirements. So then we've wasted 2 weeks for something that could have been caught at the initial submission step. So we want to make sure that we're doing our due diligence at that first step, where at the very least, we're taking a look at things like pay items, taking a look at dates for certifications, in particular, certificate of compliance and mixed designs. We're going back to the material list. We have certificate of compliance for mixed designs We have certificate of compliance for various other materials. We have lab physical samples. That's a little bit different. We'll talk a little bit about that later. But certificate of compliance and mix design is the example that we're going to go through today. Okay, so once that's happened, we've taken a look at the initial submittal. We've taken a look at it. We've reviewed it. It looks okay to us, and they have all the submittal requirements that we need to take it and put it to or give it to lab for review. There are a couple of different things that we can do. I know people will, depending on your review workflow, you may add this review workflow every single time. But one of the tips that we have said before is to create submittal templates. Now, what is a submittal template? Well, we've gone over in submittal best practices previously, but I will briefly touch on it. I won't go into too much detail here. But essentially what a submittal review template is instead of clicking add review here and then typing out who is reviewing it first, I'm going to send it to me, and then I'm going to send it to lab, and then I'm going to send it to econ team, and create this workflow every time. If we have a review that happens consistently across your project, then instead of creating these review steps every single time, what we want to do is we want to create a submittal review template. And what this does is this allows us to, instead of creating each step every single time, we can go to this choose template, and then based off of what review workflow that we've preset on our templates, we are able to just click it, and then what will happen is, it'll automatically take it and it'll automatically set up this workflow. Now, obviously this lab workflow has Josh 3 times. That is not the workflow that I wanted, but let's see if we want to change the review template. So again, see that Josh is playing around with it. But now I'm actually just going to edit it. And let's say that we had a review for lab. So what I typically like to do, so just for reference, by default on all of your projects, if you use the lab or if you use the HDOT template, lab will not get notifications on submittals on your project, because obviously all correspondence with lab is through Headlight. But just wanted to make note here that what a lot of us do in our projects and what we say is best practice is, instead of leaving the submittal in the submit for review and then totally just taking it out of ACC and conducting the review in Headlight, in order to communicate with both the contractor and also our own project team or whomever else is taking a look at the project in ACC, in order to communicate that it's currently with lab, because right now, obviously, ACC and Headlight are separated. They don't necessarily have a connection to each other. So to reflect that the submittal here is in LabScore, what a lot of projects do is they have a preset workflow where they just set the role as lab, and then we click done here, and then after we do our initial review, we'll just submit it and kind of create a dummy step where we're taking this and we're sending it to lab, but it's just a placeholder here. Your document has not been sent to lab yet. The only way to send the document officially, to send this mix design to lab, is through JC cards. So, and you guys all know that, but this is just a mechanism where it lets the contractor know where this submittal's at, and it lets our project team know, or whomever else who comes into this project knows where it's at. Okay, so the next step is, when I'm coming through here, I'm going to click on this download button, right? And I'm going to download this submittal. Okay, take the contractor's submittal. I'm going into Headlight. Now, a couple of things with Headlight, right? You notice that some of these, this is just a test project, so a lot of these things just doing for testing. A lot of these people were just doing it for testing. But notice that by default, when you create a JC card, it just shows up as JC card. And this, when we're looking at JC cards in our project to see if things have been approved, submitted, rejected, return for corrections, all of the above. The only notification that lab currently gives is when a JC card is returned for correction, so that it gets sent to the author of that JC card. And this is a request that we put in for no matter what status the JC card comes back in from lab, that we send a notification. That is still in the works. So I know that probably was going to be a question that would come up. So that is something that's still in the works, still in the docket for Headlight to incorporate. So just wanted to mention that briefly. However, in the meantime, to keep up with the various JC card and approvals and all of the correspondence, what will make things easier and what is the best practice here is don't just create the JC card, leave it as JC card. What we want to do is we want to create a JC card, and then when we're finished with the JC card, or when we've submitted it to lab, there are a couple of different steps. So initially, you go in, click on JC card. The form name is here. You don't necessarily need to. This is how it will show up, as I just showed on the Forms tab or the Forms module. But what we're going to do is after the JC number is generated, we're going to come back and edit this here. And and as we've been going through Kokuos, some of the projects follow this, some of the projects don't. We've done a training on this before. So this training here, proper naming convention. So this one is where we went over how to do this in specific. It takes less than 40 seconds. But again, I will go over this briefly here. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to create the form, fill out the form. Everybody knows how to do this, as I'm sure they've done it many times on their project. So what we're going to do is we're going to create the form. We're going to open the form. And once it loads, then we'll be able to start creating this form. I'm not going to go over the specific details, as you guys have probably created JC cards many times. But for the sake of this example, what we're going to do is we're going to just select the sample type, sample material, and obviously just a reminder, this little flask just means that these two fields are tied together. So right now I can select all of the labs, all of the sections, but when I select a design mix, let's just for the example, let's just go miscellaneous concrete design mix. It'll automatically filter it down for me so that I can eliminate as much as possible the mistake of sending it to the wrong lab. Again, that just goes to, if you send it to the wrong lab, that just wastes a week. That just wastes a week of review time. In some cases, high priority submittals, that is very valuable time that you will be losing. So we want to be sure that we are sending it to the correct lab section, sending it for acceptance, clicking all of the required documentation depending on what district you are in. You select this. Again, so these two fields here, obviously you can go in the submittal and you can, try your best to find out the manufacturer. Obviously, the manufacturer is the one who should be submitting the certificate of compliance and signing to certify, the mix design certify the certificate of compliance. But in some cases on the cover letter, the contractor will be submitting this information. So they need the supplier, manufacturer, obviously what material it is, what this material is being used for. This ties in with the pay items, but again, this is super important, right? Because at the end of the project, when we're going to generate the material certification, this material and the acceptance of this material or the rejection of this material is tied to this pay item number. So want to be sure that this is a required field, so want to make sure that we are utilizing this. And then obviously, based off of our submittal, the sub-spec section 60103, we go over to the material list, we search up for 60103 COC requirement, need to check this quantity box, need to put in this box right here, 60103. If the contractor, in most cases, what they'll do also is, if it applies to a specific sheet section, they will put that here, something like this. And you can, in order to provide more context for lab, for where it's going to be applicable on your project, you can put the sheet number as well. And then obviously, as I said before, this is the standard specification requirement. So this comes from the standard spec. we click that. But if it comes from the special provisions, we click the other option here as well if it comes from your project special provisions. And then remarks, a best practice here that I see sometimes missing on JC cards is when you're dealing with mixed designs, when you're dealing with certificate of compliance, when you're dealing with material documentation, what's helpful for lab and what makes it easier to provide them more context is if you put the mix number here. So when you put it in the remarks, and this helps lab, tie this to your attachment. So I'm going to add the file here. So I'm going to go through. I'm going to add the mix design. Delete it. Now notice when you add a file, it automatically saves, but you should be constantly saving so that if you lose connection, you're able to save your document. You don't have to start all over. Make sure these are required fields. So make sure that you're entering in the necessary information here. And then, okay, so another thing is when you're submitting mixed designs and you're submitting certificate of compliance, obviously this is not applicable. When you select the sample material mixed design here, it's still going to prompt this, but realize that this is not required. This is obviously something that's required for a physical sample, in which is the lab requirement here on the standard material list. But make sure that this, you don't need to fill this out, and this, in fact, this is not applicable to the mixed designs or certificate of compliance. But when you filter for certificate of compliance, let's say structural, this is going to disappear. This just shows up for design mixes still. So just keep that in mind when we're submitting these JC cards. But the next things you're going to want to submit this, and then obviously just going to do this for the sake of simplicity and the required fields. So I'm going to submit this. Now, the last step when I submit this is I'm going to make it easier for me to go back and forth from ACC to tie these two submittals together. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this sample number. I'm going to go into the form itself. I'm going to copy, paste so that I know the JC number and also the specific material type number, the sequencing of it. And then when I go in here, I am just going to put mixed design, and then I'm going to put in parentheses submittal number 255 from ACC. This is the best practice, and it's something that, so when I dismiss this form, and instead of just having JC card, I still see the status of this, and I see that, okay, submittal 255, all right, this connects to this one in ACC. So right now it's showing as lab, okay, it's in labs court, it's submitted as a JC card, submittal 255 is typed to this one in ACC, 255, and then the JC numbers are matching up. So then when lab ultimately approves or rejects this submittal, then we can take this, download the PDF, and then bring it back into Headlight to correspond with the contractor based off of what is needed. So I'm going to go in here, I'm going to download this JC. A lot of times what I do when I download the JC, I copy this top name, and then I hit save. And then what I'll do is I'll come in here, and then I'll select review, and then I'm going, bear with me, I'm going to drag this over, and I'm going to see this dummy lab step here in ACC. I'm going to drag and drop what lab said in here. Now, a couple of different options, right? Obviously, if it's return for corrections, then we can use that response here, and then we will write, what lab stated in the JC card, and a lot of times the comments will be down here, right? And the official lab acceptance. So a lot of times I'll copy this comment from lab, I'll throw it into here. Mix certification out date, excuse me for the typo. Something like this. And then what I'll do is I'll click done. And then this shows that lab returned it for corrections. And then obviously for corrections, you want to create a new revision, select a date, prompt the contractor that, obviously, we should be looking at our project schedule and we should be looking at, the critical items on our project. So we should have a good idea as to, if they're looking to do work with this mix, then we need to make sure that we apply a realistic and a needed date for this mix design. So this helps paint a better picture for when the urgency of this submittal. And then what we usually do is revise and resubmit per H.lab comments. And then it gets sent all the way to the beginning. And then you come in here, they'll resubmit the attachment. And then you'll go through the same process again. You'll come back in here. If it's returned for corrections, it'll say return for corrections. Here, it'll give you the ability to turn it back to draft if it's returned for corrections. And then you're able to go back in here, fill it out again, and then resubmit it to lab. Once you resubmit it to lab, obviously, put it into its proper state here so that we're connecting the two places together. I'm just going to push it through for the sake of time, because we only have 2 minutes left, but I'm going to submit it here, select review. When it finally gets approved or approved as noted or approved with conditions or accepted with conditions, then I will go back here. I will make sure that I submit the attachment. Again, though, want to be sure that when we're closing this out, have this final step. If there's attachments here, there will be an option to copy this attachment to the final step. What I usually do is I make sure that I have the original submittal by the contractor, and then I also have the JC card, and I'll copy both of those things to the final step when I approve it. And then if it's approved as noted, I make sure that the note is explicitly stated here so that the contractor is fully aware of that. And then I attach the final documents, I click next. And then what's going to happen is it's going to show you a summary page of this. And then it's going to say, yeah, it's going to give me a notification that I didn't have any attachments. You should have an attachment here in all cases. And then it's going to say approved as noted. It's going to have the attachment here on the right side corner that they're able to download. Everybody's going to get a notification who's associated with this submittal. And then subsequently, everyone on the project will be able to see this closed out submittal because it's closed on your project. So with 1 minute to spare, is there any questions that you guys have? Is there any other tips? Because obviously this is a best practice, but we're obviously we're always open to more ideas, better ideas, and more ways to connect the two portals that we use per se, the two applications that we use for going from ACC into Headlight for lab review and then back into ACC correspondence, going back and forth.
Or I get a question.
Yes.
Yeah, what about the scenario of lab rejecting course that is lesser than, let's say, 93?
Yep.
Right now it's where the acceptable compaction is 93, right? But if it's 92, so they reject it. But
yep,
technically we can accept that with a reduced payment, right? So how would you?
Yep.
So and Headlight, they rejected it, but what would you do at ACC? Would you also say rejection?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, ultimately what we're doing here is we're just reflecting what happens in Headlight, right? So what I would do in that scenario is I would still, reflect. So I would go, forgive me as my computer is being slow again right now, but what I would do here is I would, you see the lab step that I went through here. So when it's at that lab step, and I'm going to go into a better example. when I go to that lab step, what I'm going to do is I'm going to reject it. And then I'm going to put the reason why they rejected it. I'm going to say, let's say 94% compaction. But then when I go to that final step, because we have lab as a reviewer, right? So I'm going to go to 255, the one that I went through today. But then when I go to that final step, what I would do is I would say, okay, I would still reject it, but I would put in the notes here, I would say, you know, rejected, but can be paid out per spec. I'm not entirely sure off the top of my head what that spec is, where it says that you can be paid per the sliding scale at, 80% payment or whatever it is. And then where you will reconcile that later on in your project is at the material certification step. So obviously at the end of the project, it says rejected. You don't see an approved submittal that is on top of that. So then the lab asks you, well, okay, this submittal was rejected. How did you reconcile that? Then obviously you put in the notes, you say, well, okay, here's in our progress payment under pay item, 301, 401, that we paid at a reduced rate because the compaction fell within the sliding scale amount of 90% to 92%, where it wasn't full on rip and replace, it was paid at a reduced rate. So just making sure that you're communicating that with the contractor, you're communicating that with the lab team. So obviously with lab, you're communicating through Headlight, but with the contractor, you're communicating that through Autodesk Construction Cloud. So I hope that answered your question, Glenn.
Yeah, kind of. It just is another steps to explain to the lab.
Yeah, but ultimately you'll need to do that at the end of the project regardless, right? So.
Okay.
Hi, Clark.
Yes,
This is
BC.
Martin.
How's
Hi,
it going?
this is BC from the lab. Thank you for letting me to chime in on the training. A quick question regarding return for correction sample cut, JC cut. Are we talking about it will create a new JC cut or we using the same JC number?
Same JC number for return for corrections. So return
Okay.
for corrections, if it's sent back return for correction, what we'll do is, we as the submitter, if it gets returned for corrections, we have the ability to turn it back to draft and then resubmit it on the same JC card. If the JC card is rejected, however, that is when we need to create a new JC card for it if we want to resubmit.
Got you. Okay. Yes, that sounds very good. We experienced some of the sample cut, return for correction, and submitter actually create brand new sample cut.
Okay.
JC cut. So
Yep.
So
And
yeah,
that's
okay, but
just, yep.
yeah,
And
if this is do a brand new JC card, we highly recommend to refer back to what is the original return for correction. But if we can use the same JC number, that would be better.
correct, yes. And that is the best practice. That is a procedure that should be followed. And yes, obviously there may be mistakes along the way, but yes, BC, that is the correct and intended workflow. If it is returned for corrections, you turn that same JC card back to draft, resubmit it on the same JC card, similar to how in ACC you're able to create revisions. But if it's rejected, then that's when you only create a new JC card.
Okay.
So yes, I will
Clark.
announce that, as we go through, and this has been sent out in the best practices. But yes, we will reiterate that as we go through the COCUAs, we're going to check that as well. So then we'll give people reminders and recommendation as we go
Clark.
through that to do that. Yes, Marvin.
Clark, I've seen where the sample card, if it got returned and then it got edited and resubmitted, some of the old information is lost on why it was returned.
Okay. Okay. When you say some of the information has been lost,
Yeah, so when you see something being accepted, some of the reasons why it got returned might not be there anymore.
if that happened, Marvin, then that should be a bug, because that should not happen. Regardless of no matter how many revisions, both in ACC and in Headlight, no matter how many revisions you take it, you put it back to draft, you put it back to submitted, you put it back to rejected, return for corrections. You should have a submittal comment history on the JC card where you're able to see, okay, this is what happened where it initially got submitted. The COC was out of date within a year. Please resubmit. And then you go and resubmit. Then you say, okay, well, the gradation falls out of this spec section. This does not apply. So all of that will be tracked within the comment section here on the JC card itself, or the history here. The history and any comment from lab will be tracked through history. So if you experienced a loss of comments when you're submitting revisions on your project, that's a bug. Submit the ticket request to Headlight. We should be able to, or Headlight should be able to recover those comments. This should not be happening on your project. Not saying that it doesn't happen. I'm just saying that if it does happen, we'll be able to recover it. But don't be discouraged. You should be the behavior of these forms. You should be able to track all revisions. So.
Oh,
Again,
also,
Marvin.
I was wondering from the last time when I talked with Craig, when he was going over the sample cards, has there been any movement towards creating another column where, say, the project engineer can put comments or notes on in another column that's on the screen? Like, say, when the sample cards are approved and they're locked with the screen only showing JC card, and it doesn't
Oh,
have
I see.
the JC card
Okay.
number or reference to a previous, maybe it was maybe our inspector who submitted the sample card might have forgot to put the reference like Brian just mentioned, reference
I
to the
see.
one the JC card is superseded, because rather than all these other columns that doesn't do much, it might be good to have a column so you can see a sample card that superseded a previous one, or you can put the name of the title like you did on that
Yeah,
top one
so that, Marvin,
versus the other ones that get locked after
so that
approval.
seems more beneficial when you're at the material certification. Uh, because obviously if a submittal gets superseded, then you can write in the notes and you can say that this submittal superseded the other one that was rejected. But no, there has been no movement that I have seen on that request. When a JC card is approved, it is locked. So if it's stuck in this JC card name, you forgot to label it correctly, then you are not able to change the name. That is something that we can take a look at changing, where you can't edit the JC card itself, but maybe perhaps you're able to edit the JC name so that you can, for organizational purposes. Yes. So again, I will check on that.
Yeah, see,
but-
see in the old program we used to use, the CPMS, it helped to track what's happening with the sample cards during the course of construction, so that at the end, it's already there when you're ready to submit your information for the
Right.
material certification.
And that's what you're
Because
doing
it's hard to
here.
go back.
That's what you're doing here, though. So you're tracking it here through submittals. You're tracking the approval status, and also our Headlight provides the Headlight Home dashboard where you're able to filter by JC cards and see the approvals and stuff like that. So obviously, the Home dashboard is something that is customizable, something that as we are continuing to use it, we please submit feedback, and we're able to work with Headlight to customize those dashboards and see the information that you need. So thank you, Marvin, for your comments. Does anybody else have any other questions? I know, sorry guys, we're 10 minutes over, but does anyone have any last minute questions?
I had a question, but I put it in the chat.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was not looking at the chat. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. It's about just wondering why we can't have the contractor do these things like submitting on Headlight, because that way, they'd be in the loop and the workflow could still be going to the project team and then to lab so that the project team could review, but then it would kind of be the contractor's responsibility to fill out the form correctly and make sure the naming convention's right. And the project team that way is not spending so much time,
No, yeah, that's a good
making
point,
these
Sherry.
things.
That is a good point. And That's the intention of ACC. However, when we transitioned over from ACC to or from our previous software system to Headlight and ACC, ACC didn't have we didn't customize the JC card format for lab to utilize an ACC. We chose, or have ACC chose Headlight, and therefore we had this Headlight module for JC cards. And the point is that we hopefully will have an integration between the two someday, or we'll consolidate them into one software so that we can so that you can do as you're saying, where the contractor submits something and the contractor can essentially, we remove this intermediate step, right? And that's essentially what you're getting at. So yeah, the hope is that we remove that at some point. But for the moment, this is the best practice. But we hear you, and we hear you guys that removing the intermediate step would be something that would save a lot of time. So
Yeah, I think it would also
work on
help
that.
because in case there's like mistakes or you forget something between ACC and Headlight. So if it's all just on one, then it would kind of hopefully make things a little cleaner. But okay, thanks
Absolutely.
for.
Absolutely. Yeah. So good point. And we'll take that down and take it back and definitely try to work on a solution for that. Awesome. Well, I'm going to end the office hours for this morning. Thank you all for joining today. Talk to you guys later.